The Johnson family had always thought of their quaint suburban home as a sanctuary, a place where laughter thrived and cherished memories were made. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, it was the kind of house that welcomed you with its warm, inviting facade and the sweet scent of blooming flowers in the front yard. Mark and Sarah Johnson, along with their 2 children, Emma and Jake, had moved into the charming 2-story house 3 years earlier, filled with dreams and aspirations. Yet, unbeknownst to them, an unseen presence had been quietly observing their lives from the attic above. In the beginning, the signs were subtle, soft creaks and whispers that danced through the stillness of the night. The family would often hear odd noises, but they attributed them to the house settling or the wind rustling through the trees. Mark, with his penchant for horror stories, would jokingly suggest they had a ghost, while Sarah would shake her head, dismissing his playful fears with a laugh. However, as months passed, the strange occurrences escalated. Heavy footsteps echoing overhead when the house was otherwise silent, an inexplicable chill creeping through the air, and the faintest sound of breathing that seemed to linger just out of earshot. One particularly crisp autumn evening, the Johnsons decided to have a family movie night. They gathered in the living room, blankets draped over them, popcorn piled high, and laughter filling the air as they navigated through their collection of films. Just as the opening credits rolled on a classic horror film, a loud, unmistakable thump reverberated from the attic, shattering their cozy atmosphere. The laughter ceased, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Mark's heart raced in his chest as he exchanged uneasy glances with Sarah, who wore an expression of confusion mixed with concern. "I'll check it out," Mark said, forcing a nonchalant tone, even as anxiety twisted in his stomach. He grabbed a flashlight and ascended the narrow staircase to the attic, each creaking step heightening the tension that hung in the air. As he reached the top, he hesitated, hand resting on the doorknob, feeling the weight of the unknown on his shoulders. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, revealing a space filled with forgotten treasures covered in dust and cobwebs. The attic was a maze of old boxes, rusty furniture, and the remnants of a life long past. But as his flashlight beam swept across the clutter, it landed on something that sent a chill racing down his spine. A tattered sleeping bag, haphazardly shoved into the corner. Next to it, an empty can of food lay discarded, its label faded and torn. Mark's pulse quickened as he noticed a pair of worn-out shoes, partially obscured by shadows, their presence utterly unnerving. "Sarah, kids, get up here!" Mark called out, urgency bleeding into his voice. The family rushed up the stairs, confusion morphing into terror as they absorbed the sight of the attic. "What is all this?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know, but we need to call the police," Mark replied, his heart racing as panic surged within him. They huddled together, each family member trying to process the bizarre reality of the situation. Mark dialed 911, his hands shaking as he recounted the unsettling discoveries to the operator. When the police arrived, they were met with skepticism and raised eyebrows. Officers conducted a thorough search of the attic, but to the Johnsons' dismay, they found no signs of an intruder, no footprints, no evidence of forced entry, just the unsettling remnants of someone's secret life. "Are you sure you heard noises?" one officer asked, his brow furrowed with doubt. "We're not imagining this," Sarah insisted, frustration bubbling beneath her fear. "We heard it. It's been happening for weeks." The officers nodded, but their assurances fell flat. "It's possible someone could have found a way to enter without leaving a trace. Just keep your doors locked and let us know if anything else happens." As they left, the Johnsons were left to grapple with their newfound reality. Days turned into weeks, and the family tried to resume their normal lives, but the specter of the attic lingered in the back of their minds. Each night, they would huddle together, listening for any sounds that could signal the return of the unknown intruder. Then, one fateful evening, Sarah awoke in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, as she listened to the familiar scratching sound that echoed from above. It was faint but unmistakable, a low rustling that seemed to beckon her from the darkness. Panic surged through her, and she nudged Mark awake, whispering urgently, "Did you hear that?" Mark strained to listen, his face paling as the scratching continued, interspersed with quiet, muffled voices that seemed to seep through the ceiling. "We need to check," he said, though a sense of dread gripped him. They crept up the stairs, the flashlight shaking in Mark's hand as they ascended. As they reached the attic door, the whispers grew louder, words tumbling over each other in a hushed tone. Mark steeled himself, gripping the doorknob tightly. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, revealing a space that felt colder than before. The attic was empty, but the remnants of a recent presence were unmistakable. The sleeping bag was now unzipped and the can was gone, replaced by a small, hastily scribbled note that read, "I see you." Fear cascaded over them like a wave, and they fled back downstairs, barricading the door behind them. It was a night of terror, filled with sleepless hours spent listening for any sound of movement. When dawn finally broke, they knew they could not stay in the house any longer. The family packed their belongings, frantically trying to escape the grip of fear that had ensnared them. As they loaded the car, Mark couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking their every move. They left the house behind, a place that had once felt like home, now turned into a haunting memory. Weeks later, as they settled into a new place, they tried to put the nightmare behind them. But one evening, as Sarah was unpacking boxes, she stumbled upon an old photograph of their previous home. A chill coursed through her as she noticed a shadowy figure in the attic window, barely visible, watching them leave. The terror of their experience settled in once more, and they realized that some secrets never truly disappear. They linger, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the next family to uncover them. Despite the passage of time, the Johnsons were haunted by what had transpired in their former home. Each creak of their new house seemed amplified. Every shadow felt threatening. They tried to create new memories, but the ghost of their past loomed over them, a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the places we often take for granted. One night, Mark and Sarah found themselves reminiscing about their old home while watching a documentary about urban legends and unsolved mysteries. They discussed the attic and what could have happened there, speculating about who had invaded their space and how they had gone unnoticed for so long. The conversation quickly turned to their children, who were sleeping peacefully upstairs. "What if they come back?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "They can't," Mark reassured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "We're safe here." But just as he spoke, a loud crash echoed from the attic, sending chills racing down their spines. The couple exchanged terrified glances, dread pooling in their stomachs. "Did you hear that?" Sarah gasped. "Stay here," Mark said, gripping a nearby baseball bat as he slowly made his way up the stairs. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown, the air growing heavier with each creak. He reached the attic door and hesitated, heart pounding in his chest. With a deep breath, he pushed it open once more, bracing himself for whatever awaited him. The attic was dark and quiet, save for the scattered remnants of their past life. Boxes lay strewn about, and the air was thick with dust. Mark's flashlight illuminated the corners, revealing nothing but shadows. Just as he was about to turn back, he caught sight of movement in the corner. A figure, cloaked in darkness, standing amidst the chaos. Frozen in place, Mark's mind raced. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, merely tilting its head as if studying him. "What do you want?" he pressed, fear bubbling beneath his bravado. "I want what you took from me." The figure finally spoke, its voice raspy and low, echoing through the attic. Mark's blood ran cold as he realized the figure was a woman, her face gaunt and hollow, eyes wide with despair. "What do you mean?" Mark stammered, stepping back, but the woman remained still, an unsettling calm enveloping her. "I was here first," she replied, her voice laced with bitterness. "This was my home. You took everything from me." Mark's mind raced, piecing together the chilling words. You lived here?" "Yes," she hissed, stepping closer, her presence suffocating. "And I never left. You brought your family here thinking you could escape me, but I will always be here, watching, waiting." Panic surged through Mark, and he stumbled backward, slamming the attic door shut behind him. He rushed back downstairs, breathless and terrified, grabbing Sarah and the kids, and they fled. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when Sarah found herself alone in her cozy apartment, the faint glow of the television casting shadows across the room. Her husband Jake had taken their 2 children to a nearby playground, leaving her to enjoy a rare moment of peace. As she settled into her favorite armchair with a book, the familiar sound of her phone ringing shattered the tranquility. She glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Feeling a mix of curiosity and caution, Sarah answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice echoing slightly in the silence. But all she heard in response was heavy, labored breathing. An uncomfortable chill crept down her spine, and she quickly hung up, shaking off the unease that threatened to settle in. Trying to dismiss it as a prank call, Sarah returned to her book. Yet moments later, the phone rang again. This time her heart raced as she hesitated, the weight of dread hanging in the air. She answered cautiously, "Hello?" but again was met with the same unsettling sound, the sound of someone breathing, deep and ragged. Panic rose within her, and she hung up once more, glancing around the room as if the caller might be lurking in the shadows. Over the next hour, the calls continued. Each time she would answer, only to be met with that same breath, heavy and oppressive. It was as if someone was sitting on the other end, waiting, listening, and savoring her fear. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach, her mind racing with scenarios of who could be calling and why. Was it a prank? A stalker? She tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on her book instead, but the oppressive feeling loomed. When the phone rang again, her hands trembled as she picked it up. "Who is this?" she demanded, desperation creeping into her voice. The breathing continued, heavier this time, sending icy fingers of fear crawling up her spine. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice echoing in the empty room. "Leave me alone." But the line went dead, leaving only silence in its wake. Sarah glanced at the clock, 7:30 p.m. Her family should be home soon. The thought of being alone in the apartment, trapped with her anxiety, made her heart race. She decided to text Jake, asking him to hurry back. As she typed, the phone rang again, causing her to jump. This time, the caller ID showed a different unknown number. With a shaky breath, she answered, ready to confront whoever was on the other end. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. To her horror, she was met with silence, followed by that same chilling breath. It felt as if the person was savoring her fear, reveling in the control they had over her. Just then, she heard a loud bang coming from the hallway outside her apartment door. Heart pounding, she turned toward the noise, feeling a wave of nausea wash over her. "Jake?" she called out, her voice quivering. But there was no answer, just the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The phone rang again, and she answered without thinking, her fear turning to fury. "Stop calling me," she screamed. But again the breath was there, heavy and unsettling. In a moment of clarity, she realized she had to act. She hung up and dialed 911, her hands shaking as she explained the situation to the operator. "I'm home alone, and I keep getting these calls. Someone is breathing on the other end, and I heard a noise outside my door. I'm scared." The operator reassured her, promising to send an officer to her location. As she hung up, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by fear as the phone rang again. She hesitated, knowing she should ignore it, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello?" she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah?" A low, raspy voice spoke her name, sending chills coursing through her body. "I've been waiting for you." Fear flooded her senses, and she dropped the phone, backing away from the table as panic took hold. Just then, the front door swung open, and Jake walked in, laughing as the kids raced behind him. "You wouldn't believe the fun we had at the park," he said, oblivious to the dread that had enveloped Sarah. "Jake!" she exclaimed, rushing toward him, relief flooding her as she wrapped her arms around him. "I was so scared. I've been getting these calls and someone's been breathing on the line." "Calm down," Jake said, his brow furrowing with concern. "What do you mean? Did you call the police?" "I did," she replied, her voice trembling. "They're on their way, but the last call, someone said they were waiting for me." Just then, the phone rang again, causing Sarah to jump. Jake frowned and picked it up, his expression shifting to confusion as he listened. "Hello, who is this?" he asked, a deep frown settling on his face. "What do you want?" After a few moments, he hung up and turned to Sarah, a grave look on his face. It was the same number. They just kept breathing. "This isn't good, Sarah." The doorbell rang and both of them jumped. The tension in the room thickened as they exchanged worried glances. "That must be the police," Jake said, moving to answer the door. As he opened it, two uniformed officers stepped inside, looking around the apartment with cautious eyes. "We received a call about unsettling phone calls and a possible intruder," one of the officers said. Sarah quickly recounted everything, her voice shaky but clear, while the officers listened intently. After they took notes, they assured her they would check the surrounding area and look for any suspicious activity. With the police present, the calls seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the reassurance of safety. But as they spoke, the phone rang one last time, slicing through the atmosphere. Jake answered it, his face pale as he listened intently. It's no one, just heavy breathing," he said, glancing at Sarah with a mixture of fear and confusion. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a loud crash echoed from the back of the apartment. The officers exchanged looks, moving swiftly toward the sound, while Sarah and Jake remained frozen in place. "Stay here," one officer instructed, drawing his weapon as he advanced cautiously down the hallway. Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her as she followed, instinctively clutching Jake's arm. As they reached the back room, they found the window ajar, the curtains billowing ominously in the wind. But there was no one there, only the dark, empty space that seemed to taunt them. The officers searched the area, but found no sign of an intruder. "It looks like someone may have just been messing with you. Keep your doors locked and call us if anything else happens," one officer said, his voice calm but serious. As they left, Sarah and Jake were left grappling with the unsettling reality of the situation. They spent the night huddled together on the couch, the kids nestled in their beds, while the phone remained silent. The terror had left a mark on their family, a reminder of how quickly safety could turn into fear. Days passed and the calls ceased, but the unease lingered. They decided to install a security system, hoping to regain a sense of control over their lives. But the silence that followed felt heavy, a constant reminder of the dread that had invaded their home. One evening, as Sarah was getting the kids ready for bed, the phone rang again. Heart racing, she glanced at Jake, who was watching from the living room. "I'll get it," he said, a mix of determination and fear in his voice. As he answered, Sarah held her breath, waiting for the familiar sound of that haunting breath. But instead, Jake's face went pale. "What do you mean? Who is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. The line went silent, and then they heard a low, mocking laugh before the call abruptly ended. "Jake," Sarah whispered, stepping closer, feeling the weight of fear settle back into her bones. "What did they say?" He turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief. It was the same voice, but it said something different. It said, "I'll always be watching you." Fear enveloped them once more, a chilling reminder that some shadows never truly disappear. They linger, hidden just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike again. And as the night deepened, they knew they were not alone, the silence now a haunting echo in the back of their minds. For years, Jenna had considered her old Victorian house a cozy retreat from the chaos of her busy life. Nestled in a quiet neighborhood, the creaky wooden floors and antique charm added to its appeal. But lately, an unsettling feeling had begun to creep into her sanctuary. Every night, just as she settled down for bed, she would hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing from the basement below. At first, Jenna dismissed the noises as the house settling, a common occurrence in older homes. She would remind herself that every house had its quirks, and perhaps the old floorboards simply had a way of talking. But as the nights turned into weeks, the sounds grew more pronounced. It was no longer just a soft creaking. It was distinct heavy footsteps pacing back and forth, as if someone were wandering through the darkness. One particularly restless night, Jenna lay in bed, her heart pounding against her ribcage. She listened intently as the footsteps resumed their rhythmic march beneath her, echoing in the stillness. Mustering her courage, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cool wooden floor. "It's just your imagination," she whispered to herself, But deep down, fear gripped her tightly. She couldn't take it anymore. With a flashlight in hand, Jenna slipped out of bed and made her way to the basement door. The knob felt cold and heavy in her palm as she hesitated, contemplating whether she should go down there at all. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath and turned the handle. As she descended the stairs, the beam of her flashlight flickered against the damp stone walls, illuminating the shadows that danced around her. The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and she shivered as she reached the bottom step. The faint sound of footsteps had ceased, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. "Hello?" she called out, her voice echoing off the walls. There was no response, just the steady drip of water somewhere in the distance. Heart racing, Jenna began to scan the basement, shining her light across the cluttered space filled with old furniture and boxes. Dust motes floated in the beam, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Just as she was about to turn back, a noise caught her attention. A soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps again. They were closer this time, almost directly behind her. Jenna spun around, her breath hitching in her throat, but the basement was empty, the shadows stretching menacingly in the corners. Panic surged through her as she sprinted back up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against it, heart pounding, listening for any signs of movement. The footsteps had returned, this time louder and more insistent, as if someone were trying to escape from the basement. Jenna's mind raced with questions. Who could be down there? Was someone living in her house without her knowledge? Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to set up a camera in the basement. The following night, armed with coffee and a brave face, she prepared for a long vigil. Hours passed in anxious anticipation, her eyes glued to the small screen. Just when she thought the night would pass without incident, the camera flickered to life. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual, just the dark, still basement. But then, around midnight, the shadows shifted. Jenna's heart raced as she saw the unmistakable outline of a figure emerge from the far corner. It moved cautiously, the footsteps echoing in a chilling rhythm. Jenna's breath caught in her throat as she watched the figure wander aimlessly, its features obscured by darkness. Was it a ghost? A squatter? A chill washed over her as she realized that whatever it was, it seemed to be searching for something. Unable to watch any longer, Jenna grabbed her phone and dialed the police. As she explained her situation, she could hear the footsteps continuing, each thud reverberating through the air like a countdown to something inevitable. The operator assured her that help was on the way, but as she hung up, she felt a deep sense of dread settle in. When the officers arrived, they were skeptical, but agreed to check the basement. Jenna led them down the stairs, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. The footsteps had stopped, leaving only an oppressive silence. The officers swept the area with their flashlights, peering into the shadows. After a thorough search, one officer turned to Jenna. "There's no one here, ma'am. Just some old furniture and clutter. Are you sure you heard footsteps?" Before she could respond, the other officer's light flickered, revealing a figure standing in the far corner of the basement. Jenna's heart sank as she realized it was just an old mannequin, its face covered in dust, frozen in a distorted pose. Feeling embarrassed and relieved all at once, Jenna explained the situation. "I swear it was moving. I know what I heard." The officers exchanged glances, unsure of how to reassure her. "We'll leave a patrol car nearby tonight. Keep your doors locked, and call us if you hear anything again," one officer said, attempting to comfort her as they exited. As Jenna closed the basement door behind them, she felt a mixture of relief and frustration. The footsteps had vanished, but the fear remained, gnawing at her mind. She decided to call it a night, hoping that sleep would chase away the memories of the past few days. But the following night, as she lay in bed, the footsteps returned, louder and more relentless than ever. Jenna's heart raced as she bolted upright, determined to confront whatever haunted her home. She grabbed her flashlight and descended the stairs once more, her nerves fraying with each step. This time, however, as she reached the bottom, she felt a surge of resolve. "Show yourself!" she shouted into the darkness, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. To her surprise, the footsteps stopped, and a heavy silence fell over the basement. Holding her breath, she waited, her heart pounding. Suddenly, a small beam of light flickered on from the corner of the room, illuminating a hidden doorway Jenna had never noticed before. Curiosity overtook her, and she moved toward the light, pushing the door open. The room beyond was small and cramped, filled with old relics of the past, boxes of forgotten memories and dusty furniture. But in the center of the room lay a journal, its pages yellowed with age. As Jenna picked it up, she felt a chill sweep through her, as if the very air around her had shifted. Flipping through the pages, she discovered stories of the house's former occupants, tales of love, loss, and betrayal. It seemed the footsteps belonged to the memories of those who once called this place home, echoes of their lives lingering in the shadows. In that moment, Jenna understood that the presence she felt was not one of malevolence, but rather a longing to be remembered. The footsteps were a reminder of the lives that had been intertwined with the house, and she felt a strange sense of connection to them. From that night on, the footsteps became less menacing and more like a gentle reminder of the past. Jenna began to embrace the stories of her home, sharing them with her children as they explored the basement together. The shadows no longer felt threatening, and the footsteps transformed into a comforting presence, a reminder that they were never truly alone. As time passed, Jenna became the new steward of the house's history, honoring the lives that had come before her. The footsteps faded into the background, but their memory remained, a testament to the idea that every home holds the whispers of those who once walked its halls. And sometimes, the past is meant to be celebrated, not feared. As dusk descended on the small, quiet town of Maplewood, Clara sat in her living room, lost in the pages of her favorite novel. The flickering glow of the fireplace cast a warm light throughout the cozy space, creating a comforting atmosphere that enveloped her like a hug. The world outside was slowly darkening, and the trees swayed gently in the cool evening breeze. She felt at peace, unaware that this tranquility was about to be shattered. Suddenly, a movement caught her eye. Clara looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she noticed a shadowy figure standing just beyond the window, framed by the thick oak tree in her front yard. The figure was tall and obscured by the fading light, its features indistinguishable. Clara's breath caught in her throat as her heart raced. She was home alone, and her mind raced with questions. Who could it be? Had someone come to visit unannounced? As she squinted through the glass, trying to discern the figure's identity, it moved slightly, causing her pulse to quicken. There was no mistaking it now. The figure was watching her. Panic surged through her veins, and she instinctively stood up, stepping closer to the window to get a better look. But just as she approached, the shadow vanished, swallowed by the night. Clara's stomach twisted in knots as she tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, a trick of the light. Yet the unease settled in her chest like a stone. Shaking off the feeling, she returned to her chair, forcing herself to focus on the book in her hands. The story seemed to blur together as her mind kept drifting back to the figure in the window. Minutes turned into hours, and Clara tried to dismiss the shadow as nothing more than a figment of her overactive imagination. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, her resolve began to waver. The house was too quiet, the shadows too deep. Every creak of the old floorboards sent chills racing down her spine, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Just as she was about to retreat to her bedroom, she heard it again, a faint tapping sound coming from the window. Clara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly, she turned her head toward the noise, dread pooling in her stomach. She could see the faint outline of the figure re-emerging, this time closer, its form more defined against the glow of the street lamp. Without thinking, Clara grabbed her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her best friend, Mia. "Mia, I think someone's outside my house," she whispered urgently, trying to keep her voice steady. "I saw a shadow figure watching me through the window." "Clara, are you sure you're not just imagining things?" Mia asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light." "No, I'm serious. It's right there," Clara insisted, her voice rising in panic. "Please, just come over." Mia hesitated for a moment, but finally agreed to come over. Clara ended the call, her heart still racing. She moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. The figure had vanished again, leaving only the stillness of the night. Her breath hitched as she considered the possibility that it might have moved away. Moments later, the doorbell rang, causing Clara to jump. She rushed to the door, relief washing over her as she opened it to find Mia standing there looking concerned. "What's going on?" she asked, stepping inside and glancing around the darkened living room. "I saw someone watching me from the window," Clara explained, leading Mia toward the spot where she had seen the shadow. "I swear it was right here." Together they approached the window, but there was nothing to see, only the empty street and the swaying trees. Mia frowned, looking skeptical but supportive. Maybe it was just a reflection or a branch moving. "It's Halloween, people are always playing pranks." Clara nodded, trying to convince herself that was the case. But as they settled into the living room, the uneasy feeling lingered. They decided to distract themselves with a movie, hoping to drive away the anxiety that had settled over them like a thick fog. About halfway through the film, Clara's phone buzzed on the table, vibrating with a new message. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart drop. It was a message from her neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. "Hey Clara, I just wanted to check if everything is okay. I saw someone lurking around your house earlier." Panic shot through Clara's veins. "Mia, we have to do something. Mrs. Thompson saw the figure too," she exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper. Just then, they heard a loud thud from outside, followed by a rustling sound. Clara and Mia exchanged terrified glances, their eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" Mia whispered, gripping Clara's arm tightly. "I don't know. We need to call the police," Clara said, her heart racing as she reached for her phone. But before she could dial, the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. The tapping returned, more insistent this time, echoing through the silence like a heartbeat. Mia moved to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. "I'm going to look," she said, her voice shaking. Clara watched, her breath held tight in her chest, as Mia peered into the darkness. Then suddenly, a scream pierced the night, a blood-curdling sound that froze Clara in place. Mia stumbled back, her face pale with terror. "It's right there," she gasped, pointing toward the window. Clara felt a rush of adrenaline as she turned to look, her heart hammering in her chest. There it was again, the shadowy figure, now closer than ever, its features still obscured but unmistakably there, standing just outside their home, watching them with an intensity that sent chills down her spine. "Get down!" Clara shouted, pulling Mia to the floor as they both huddled behind the couch. The footsteps resumed, heavy and deliberate, as if the figure were moving around the house, searching. Fear gripped Clara tightly, squeezing her lungs until it was hard to breathe. "Did you call the police?" Mia asked, her voice trembling. "I was about to, but I got scared," Clara replied, her heart racing as the footsteps drew closer to the front door. Mia reached for Clara's phone, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. As the operator answered, Clara listened intently, her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the oppressive silence that followed felt suffocating. "Ma'am, can you tell me your address?" the operator asked calmly. Before Clara could respond, the front door creaked open, revealing the shadowy figure standing in the doorway. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stared into the darkness, fear coursing through her veins like ice. Just as the operator began to speak again, the figure stepped forward, and Clara's mind raced with confusion and terror. But as the figure emerged into the light, she gasped in disbelief. It was a young man, his face obscured by a hood, but his eyes wide with fear and desperation. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he exclaimed, his voice trembling. "I was looking for help. My car broke down and I thought you might have a phone charger." Clara's heart raced, a mix of relief and confusion flooding her senses. The figure hadn't been malicious. He had been lost and afraid, just like her. "You scared us," Clara shouted, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "Why didn't you knock?" "I didn't want to alarm you. I saw the lights on and thought I'd just stand here, hoping someone would come out," he replied, stepping closer. The police arrived moments later, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Clara quickly explained the situation, and the officers laughed at the misunderstanding, assuring her that it was a common mistake. They helped the young man with his car, and as they left, Clara turned to Mia, who was still visibly shaken. "Let's make sure to always check before jumping to conclusions next time," Clara said, her heart finally beginning to settle. As the night wore on, Clara and Mia shared a laugh over the absurdity of the situation, the tension slowly dissipating. But the shadow that had loomed in the window would forever remind Clara of the unexpected fears that can emerge in the dark and the importance of facing them with courage and compassion. Every morning, Sarah cherished her routine, a steaming cup of coffee, the soft hum of her favorite playlist, and a moment of quiet to prepare for the day ahead. Her little bungalow, nestled on a peaceful street, felt like a sanctuary from the outside world. But recently, a sense of unease had crept into her once happy home. It started innocently enough, with the first note appearing on her kitchen counter. "I'm watching you," it read in shaky handwriting, the words scrawled hastily as if the writer had been in a hurry. At first, Sarah thought it was a prank, perhaps a cruel joke from one of her friends. She dismissed it and tossed the note in the trash, hoping it would be the last she'd see of such nonsense. But the next day, another note appeared, this time on her pillow. "You can't hide," it taunted, chilling her to the bone. The note was folded neatly, as if it had been placed there deliberately. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. How had someone gotten into her locked home? Determined to brush it off as an elaborate prank, she locked her doors and windows tighter than ever, double-checking each one before going to bed. She confided in her best friend, Lily, who insisted that they should call the police, but Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to appear paranoid. After all, it was probably just a sick joke. But as the days passed, the notes kept coming. Each one was more menacing than the last, finding their way into her belongings. "I know your secrets," one read, tucked into her favorite book. Another, "You should be afraid," slipped under her car windshield wiper. The chilling realization that someone was inside her home, uninvited, haunted her. Sarah began to feel like a prisoner in her own house. The walls, once a comforting embrace, now felt like they were closing in on her. She avoided being home alone, always making sure Lily was with her. But the notes continued, unrelenting. Each time she found one, her heart would race, panic twisting in her gut. Who was doing this? Why were they targeting her? One evening, after a long day at work, Sarah returned home to find a note taped to her front door. "Tonight is the night," it read, and her heart sank. She could feel the walls of her sanctuary closing in, suffocating her. A sense of dread enveloped her as she read the note again, her hands trembling. She quickly called Lily, her voice shaking as she explained everything that had happened. "You have to come over, please. I can't be alone tonight." Lily arrived within minutes, her concern evident as she surveyed the tense atmosphere. "Sarah, we need to get you out of here. This isn't just a prank anymore," she insisted. As they sat together in the living room, surrounded by the shadows of the night, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and anger rising within her. "I won't let them win," she declared, gripping her phone tightly. "I'm going to take control." Determined to face her tormentor, Sarah devised a plan. She decided to leave her home as usual, but this time she would set a trap. She would leave her phone recording in the living room, hoping to catch whoever was sneaking in. As night fell, the two friends made themselves scarce, going out for dinner to give the intruder the chance to strike. The hours dragged on, and Sarah felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. They returned home late, tiptoeing inside and holding their breath as they reached the living room. Sarah quickly retrieved her phone, her heart pounding as she pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing the room in a dim glow. They watched intently, eyes glued to the screen, but all they saw was darkness, until a shadow moved across the frame. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The shadow stepped into view, and the two friends leaned in closer, breathless with suspense. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, but they could see a flash of white paper in its hand, a note. With a quick motion, the figure slipped the note onto the table before retreating into the shadows. Sarah felt her stomach drop as she realized this was real. She was being watched, and she had the evidence now. Lily hurried to call the police, explaining the situation, while Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline surge through her veins. They wouldn't let this go unpunished. Minutes later, the police arrived, taking the footage seriously. They searched the house and found no signs of forced entry. "This is unsettling," one officer admitted, "but we'll do our best to track down this individual." As they left, Sarah felt a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. But as she sat back down, her gaze fell upon the table where the figure had placed the note. It lay there, taunting her, waiting to be read. With trembling hands, she picked it up. The handwriting was familiar, but still unsettling. "You should have left while you had the chance." Her breath caught in her throat, panic surging as she turned to Lily. "What if it's someone I know?" A heavy silence fell over the room as they both realized the implications. Someone close to her could be behind the notes, watching her every move. But who could it be? The paranoia seeped into her mind, twisting every interaction she had ever had with friends and acquaintances into something sinister. Days turned into weeks, and the police investigation continued, but the notes stopped coming. For a fleeting moment, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe it was over, she thought, but the relief was short-lived. The anxiety lingered, a specter that refused to be shaken. One evening, as she was preparing for bed, Sarah noticed a small envelope resting on her nightstand. She felt her heart drop as she approached it, recognizing the familiar handwriting. Inside, a single piece of paper read, "I'm still watching. Don't think you're safe." The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, became a prison filled with fear and uncertainty. No longer able to sleep, she began to question everything around her. Who was watching her? And more importantly, when would it end? Sarah felt the weight of the notes pressing down on her, each one a reminder that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting. The sense of safety she once had was gone, replaced by a haunting question that echoed through her mind. Who could she trust when the enemy might be someone she knew? Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.